Hello. Many people with ongoing depression experience a worsening of symptoms over the holidays. So let's talk about that and things you can do about it. Welcome to Wellness with John. I'm John Peters, and these are resources to help you thrive. So, in this video, I want to talk about worsening symptoms of depression over the holidays. So, if you have ongoing depression, I want to give you some tips to think about in terms of managing that well. And first, let me say though, if you end up at any point in a crisis where you need immediate attention, if you're not already connected with psychiatric and therapy services where they have emergency services, then it's important to keep yourself safe and alive. You can call or text 988, you can call 911, or you can go to the nearest emergency department. So, in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about worsening symptoms of depression in the period around the holidays because this is actually a common issue. So, if you look at the research that surveys people with a mental health diagnosis, a significant portion, around 40%, say that the holiday season makes their symptoms somewhat worse. But about the same amount of people also say that the holiday season makes their symptoms much more worse, right? So we're talking about somewhat worse and a lot worse. And, overall, we're talking 80% of people with the diagnosis of depression are saying it's at least somewhat worse. And for some people, it gets severely worse. So, a couple tips that I want to throw out is when you're going through cycles of depression, if you've had ongoing depression for years, certainly you have learned a lot about what your own patterns are and what the specific types of situations, if you have any, are that can worsen your symptoms. And this is worth paying attention to. It's not always something that, if you know about it, you necessarily can manage it because all of those factors may not be under your control. But this is a type of thing that would be good for you to work with a therapist because often, even if, for example, like having to spend lots of time with family where you have complicated relationships, that may not be something where there's a simple solution, but usually there are aspects of that situation that are more in your control that you can manage to your advantage. Those can be nuanced and complicated, which is why it's often good to work with a therapist to develop strategies that work best for you given your situation, right? But here's some general tips that I throw out there for people in order to stay healthier during the holiday season because even people without a mental health diagnosis report that the holidays are stressful. So if you have depression, one issue is since everybody's stressed around the holidays, you're going to be absorbing more stress from those around you. So one bit of advice I give is whatever supports are working for you already, you want to make sure that you keep those in play as much as possible through the holidays. And there may be factors that influence that, but it's worth paying attention to. So when I work with a depressed patient, part of what I'm trying to figure out and what we explore is, what types of things help you not be depressed, right? So sometimes we have a deficit model and we talk about what makes you depressed. But one important thing is why do people not get worse? Or why is your depression only so severe? Or what types of things help cause remission of your symptoms, right? So often this is social support and good activities like regular physical activity, trying to get optimal sleep. Although that's a pervasive issue that a lot of people don't get great sleep. But if you get chronic sleep deficits, that tends to work against you in terms of managing your emotions. But basically keep things in play that generally do work to support you, because even if you don't have a lot of extra stress or triggers that happen during the holiday season, if we take away too many of the things that are keeping you healthier, then you're going to have a net negative effect. So, whatever is already in play that helps you not be depressed, you want to keep those things in play as much as possible. Now, as you encounter extra stress during the holidays, you want to make sure that you don't do things that put you at significantly higher risk of decompensating and getting worse. So, I generally recommend that people not increase their alcohol intake during the holidays, because alcohol is a depressant. So if you're already depressed part of the time, then you're only going to make that worse by drinking more alcohol. So you want to keep your alcohol use moderate to low through the holiday season in order to not have the alcohol itself exacerbate your symptoms. Another issue that comes up that's a pervasive issue that's not only true during the holidays, but is a factor in depression, is participation in social media platforms and also watching the news. So, the news is going to have troubling content no matter what time of the year you're looking at it. And if you are more depressed, you need to throttle the news and catch yourself if you start doom scrolling after some terrible event. And there's always plenty of content like that to suck you in and kind of cause you to go down the rabbit hole of thinking about urgent, terrible, troubling, dire kinds of news stories. But also social media, even if you're not looking at news stories that are troubling, social media is going to, for a lot of people, be a source of stress and depression. And this is partly because when you look at social media posts by other people, often other people are just, exposing and representing their shiny, happy self, and that causes a comparison. So I feel miserable, and that person looks happy, or I'm not having a good time, and that person's having a wonderful time, right? So that type of comparison tends to actually make people more depressed. And then, of course, on social media platforms, interpersonal conflicts can arise. Somebody might post something that's controversial, and then there's people arguing or flaming each other in the comments, and you get either as a passive observer affected by it, or you might get drawn into it and start participating in some way that actually causes more stress. And, if you've watched other videos on my platform, you know that my general advice is not that we solve our stress in life by being apathetic or going and burying our heads in the sand, but we do need to use our wisdom to carefully throttle how much we expose ourselves to things that are going to be incitatory or troubling. And this is especially true if you're dealing with ongoing depression, or if you're, more on the edge of functioning and you don't want to decompensate and feel more severely depressed, whether it's over the holidays or any other time of the year. But so I think, that's the counterbalancing pressure to minimize how much you participate in social media platforms, and also how much you expose yourself to the news cycles, which never end. There's an infinite amount of bad news that you can watch all day, every day, and you need to limit that. So another thing is that I'm not a doctor and I can't give you medical advice about medications, but I will say, as a therapist who works with lots of people who take antidepressant medications, um, a lot of people do work with their provider in order to potentially up their dose. If you're on something that's working for you and you have some headroom to go up in the dosing range, that's something to consider discussing with your provider, because I've had a lot of patients over the years who are on X milligrams of a certain antidepressant, but around the holiday season, they work with their provider to go up one notch in the dosing range, and that ends up giving them a little extra benefit. And then after they get through the holidays and into whatever time period, they think that outside contributing stress is not going to affect them as much, then they go back down to their baseline dose in order to manage and maintain. So that's something to consider, and you could talk with your provider about whether or not they think that that's a good idea for you, right? But definitely keep alcohol low, keep exposure to news cycles and social media pretty throttled. Try to get good sleep. Keep the things that are already working for you in play so that you don't have a net increase in your stress load because you take away some things that help you manage. And another thing that I tell people, and this kind of relates to the more complex strategies that you might work out for yourself or be working out in your therapy process if you have a provider. And that is that just remember that there are short term strategies that sometimes we need to do because there's some urgency, but short term doesn't always mean long term. And I say this partly because sometimes we need to do things in the short term that we might not want to commit to in the long term. For example, limiting our contact with a particular family member. Maybe in the long term, we don't want to end that relationship and cut them completely off. But in the short term, if that relationship is contributing a disproportionately large amount of stress to our overall stress load, we might want to consider how we keep boundaries with our exposure to those interactions, right? So the boundary might be a short term solution, even if it isn't necessarily the best long term solution. And I'm not just talking about boundaries here, but I do think it's good to sometimes think about whatever strategies you're contemplating using to manage a stressor. There's often a difference between short and long term strategies. And if we don't differentiate those, then we're naturally going to be resistant to certain strategies because we might not want to use them long term. They might come with certain outcomes and costs that are unacceptable, but that doesn't mean that we can't use some version of that strategy in the short term, right? So give yourself permission to do things to take care of yourself now that may not necessarily be the strategies that you commit to in the long term, because it's important that you are responsive to your own needs now in order to be able to continue to play whatever those games are that you're involved in with the people in your lives more long term, right? But just realize that if you experience more stress, if your depression seems to get worse over the holidays, you are not alone. In fact, you're in the majority. It's actually a small minority of people that don't feel extra stress during the holidays or don't have worsening of their mental health symptoms during that time period, right? So take care of yourself, get good support. If you don't yet have a therapist, you might consider talking to someone competent, and just keep the things that help you in play. So if you like this kind of content, please hit the like button below. If you have yet to subscribe to my channel, feel free to subscribe. And one last thing that I want to leave you with before I end the video is be aware that I do have a stress reduction mastery course, and I'll put a link down in the description below if you want to check out the information about that. But that's a course of strategies that I have taught to thousands of patients and students over the years. Very, very effective to quickly lower your stress and also to teach you things that help you rewire your stress system so that over time you actually handle stress much better. And they're easy to learn, easy to practice. And the good news about that course is I'm so confident that it works, given that it has worked with so many people I've shared it with, that if you take the course and it doesn't lower your stress, it's 100% guaranteed. I'll just give you your money back. So check out the link in the description below if you want more information about that. And thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you in a future video.